Hello, everyone. And I have some high expectations here. Thank you, Kimberly, for putting that in the chat. So I'll try to match those. So my name is Morgane Peng. I am currently presenting from London, but originally I'm from France. And today I will be talking about interface complexity and dealing with complexity as a designer. And you may be doing that in your daily job, or maybe you're completely not sure what it is, but this is exactly what I'm going to cover today. And yes, as we said at the beginning, questions at the end, but feel free to comment along the way. So before I jump right in, the question I'd like to ask you is, how do you pitch your job as UX practitioners? Because very often, I'm sure you've seen people kind of arguing as a community, what is our job? Because we don't even, how do we pitch our job when we don't even agree on the definition of design or even our job titles? And 9 years ago, when I started an in-house design team at my company, so Society General, which is like a 150-year-old financial group, well, most people were not familiar at all with design, and there were so many acronyms: UX, CX, UCD, etc. So I really had to think hard about how to explain all this. And let's be honest, this, which is like some definitions you can find online, doesn't help because if anything, it confuses people even more. And especially people who spent their entire career without designers and they were fine with it. So very often, what we tend to say are things like, "Oh yeah, I make horrible tools easier, or I make things as easy as RBNPA, and the iPhone, etc. Or I make people's life easier." And I've been guilty of using those shortcuts a lot because the question I'm like to ask here really is a mission as designers to really simplify everything and simplify, but from whose point of view? It's a bit like if I was going around on the trading floor saying, those people with like hundreds of screens with hundreds of numbers and buttons. It's a bit like if I was like, oh wow, that's horrible. Let me correct that. Boom, one button. That's it. I replaced everything. And obviously, this doodle is a bit extreme, but I've definitely heard people say things such as, "Oh yeah, it was too cluttered, so I removed that," or "Yeah, icons are more aesthetics. I don't want to label anything." And by the way, that's not good for accessibility. And oh, but that wasn't looking nice, so I removed it. And so what I'm trying to get at here is that's okay as designers and non-professional, but maybe those people actually need those things. And maybe what we actually did end up doing is kind of oversimplifying things, which is kind of creating a black box, especially in complex industries. So I'm thinking everything related to healthcare, finance, employee tools. And I kind of find this, especially on social media, that this black box is prevalent. Like everything that you've seen, like the before UX, after UX, top UX, UI tips, everything needs to be super neat, super simplified, super light, and there's no context attached to any of the screens. And I can also see this mindset that creeps into our hiring interviews, where sometimes candidates just assume that we have to simplify everything. And because now I mentor a lot of students as well in boot camps, I realized that most of those curriculums, they don't expose people to advanced design or what it's like to design for expert users or advanced users. So that's the genesis of my talk. It started first as something we share in the team to kind of onboard them to what we actually do, then become a Medium article, and then a talk. And so I'm very pleased to be sharing this talk today in its full version at Convey UX. So I'm going to talk about three things. First, as I said, we're not always familiar with what designing for professional looks like. So I've gathered a couple of real life examples. Then I'll share a concept to help you find the right balance between simplicity and complexity in your projects. And finally, if you're exploring the complex design space, or maybe you're interested or tempted by it, how to survive and thrive. Okay, so we will start with comparisons. I'm sure in your everyday life, you use lots of like consumer services or apps. whether you're listening to music, watching videos, getting food delivered. But have you ever thought about the people who work behind the scenes and what they use? Because we don't really get to see this kind of advanced version very often. And I mean, unless you're part of this industry, right? This kind of intimate circle. And so this is why I gathered a couple of examples for you. So the first one is super classic. I'm sure everyone knows this search engine. But yeah, what's on the other hand for the professional? Who's feeding all this, especially the ads, which is not taking so much of Google's front page? Well, this is the Google Ads interface. And as you can see here, it's very compact. The font is actually smaller, and it's just a bunch of what you could say is boring gray tables. But that actually represents Google's main source of revenue. Last time I checked, for last year's numbers, it was 80%. So yeah, this kind of seemingly random, boring stuff is what makes Google lots of money. And Sam, when we move to this example, which is the booking industry, the travel industry. So this is a classic booking system. It's very simple, step by step, with a lot of progressive disclosure. You first search for one way and then the other way, etc. But here again, if you think about someone who does that all day long, so for example, the travel agents, they wouldn't use something like this. They actually use something like this, which is the behind the scenes version. And here it's a lot more compact. They can see multiple currencies. They can see details, seats availability, different combination, all in one screen. Moving on, health. I talked about healthcare. So same story here. This is probably what you and I would see if we use the Apple Health app. But again, that's not what health professional would use. More something like this. Honestly, when I saw this, I really don't get what's happening here. There's a lot of acronyms and everything, but yeah, they all need this. And my final example is from navigation. So this is, I'm sure you know Waze, and you can get lots of information when you're kind of like moving around, traffic, conditions, etc. And you will click on each icon to expand and see the details. But some people need to see more than that. And this one is actually a screenshot from the French National Security Alert System that they use to actually dispatch emergency vehicles. And you can see the map is actually quite compact, but there's a lot of things happening here because when they dispatch a vehicle, they need to know who is in need of assistance, what kind of problem is it, is there any surrounding dangers, again, all in one screen. And I was chatting with the designer this week, actually, and he was telling me that, like this white space that is still remaining, it got even more complex because once that got into production, they realized that they still needed to add on more information so people can make the best decision. I would say then, and also just to introduce what I do at my work, is even in the B2B space. So again, think employees, think professional. Even in the B2B space, you have different levels of complexity. This one is, for example, a screen that we'll give to our clients for French small and medium enterprises. And that's to manage the foreign exchange needs. It kind of looks like what you could use as your personal banking app, but kind of more to manage foreign exchange. But again, this is more like for small and medium enterprises because again, what would like a big treasurer, a treasurer for a big company use, or even our internal employees or internal sales and traders, that would use more something like this. Here, again, a lot more compact, lots of things going on. They have to follow multiple currencies at the same time, and they have to actually deal with more advanced financial instruments. And I hope you start to see a thread, the same common topics going on, because here our promise is to allow them to be efficient at their work and keep them in the flow of their work. So basically, to be professionals. So from a designer point of view, when you see those screens, in my comparisons, you may think, oh my God, they're complex, they're so difficult to grasp, they're stressful, I will never be able to use them. But from the professional point of view, well, yes, those screens, they are complex, but they're easy to deal with because they're used to all those notions and they are empowering. And essentially what we say is business professionals and employees, they don't need to be spoon-fed. Their work is to know how the work works. And especially here, sometimes the simplest design is not always the most efficient. And when designers try to oversimplify things, we are actually making it harder for them to use their tools. All right, so how do we know how to manage all this? Because the idea is not to go back to when everything was a mess in the interface. And so that's the reason why I'd like to introduce a concept to help understand how you can reach the right balance. This concept is called the UX efficient frontier. And basically, after working many, many years in finance, I realized there's this notion that could be used, applied to this. And the idea is to separate two notions. You have on one side the business expertise, and the other side, you have the interface expertise. So let's define each words. So for business expertise, it's basically a person's knowledge in an area or topic due to studies, trainings, or work experience. So let's say or if you remember when you were starting out in your job, at the beginning, you don't really understand what's happening. You're just trying to get it right to do your job. But after a few years, months, who knows, you will get more comfortable and things will become more automatic. You will be in the flow. And this kind of business level understanding also includes the mental model on how people approach the task and processes. So again, that'll be something moving from how should I do it to how can I stay in the flow. And I one day saw this tweet from Jordan, someone I worked with, who was kind of complaining that he gets asked all the time to replicate Excel in the browser because he is developing for people who use Excel on a daily basis. So for those types of people, everything should allow them to manipulate their data as efficiently as Excel. And if they can't do it, they get super frustrated. But if you're not a power user of Excel, you actually don't even know what they mean when they say that. All right, so what about the interface expertise? So that's a person's knowledge of how an interface works due to their habits of using it or experience from using similar services. So let's say if you've used a food delivery app once, well, the interaction pattern becomes super familiar, and especially now that we try to standardize everything in our industry, and then that means you probably know how to use all of them. So that would look more like something like this. When you get super comfortable, and especially in some of the tools, you can even just like navigate by keyboard. I don't know if there's any Figma super power user, but there's a lot of you do just by keyboard, whereas at the beginning, you're just learning to use the tool. All right, so now if we plot the two together, you will get something like this. So any design above the curve is overcomplicated. You're making it harder for your users to use your service. And any design below the curve, on the other hand, is oversimplified. You are destroying value and putting them at risk of not being able to do their work. Remember the black box. And so what you have in the middle is the UX efficient frontier. It represents a sweet spot between those two areas, and ideally, you want to be on the curve. So to give you some examples of combination, in here, you have low everything. So you don't need a lot of expertise in the interface, and you're not a business expert. And this is, I think, most of the products we use as a regular consumer. And you can think about, all the apps you use as, again, to get food delivered, listening to music, watching videos, etc. When you're not, for example, a music producer or like you're not recording music yourself. Here, that's actually where a lot of, if you work in any organization with legacy tools, well, that's where those tools are. They're usually located at this red cross. It's basically an interface that is quite complicated, but actually the business needs is not that complex. And I would say that this is where my team's playground is. We're trying to get closer to the curve. And we're trying to design the best experience, taking into account of users' business needs. The last combination, and for me, this is actually the danger zone. This is where the interface has been dumbed down too much. And to me, that's by far the danger when we are designers are drawn into projects and not given access to users or not able to do research. Yeah, danger zone. So again, sometimes I still hear those jokes around, hey, don't ask me, I'm just the designer, and it's okay, I'll just want to make it pretty. But we have responsibilities, and those design issues, they have real consequences in real life, but in digital products too. People can get hurt, make mistakes, lose their job or worse. So really, one thing I think to maybe remember of this talk today is this question: am I giving the right amount of complexity to the right people? And am I giving enough friction or keeping enough friction where it needs to be? And when my project people are too influenced by what they usually see on the consumer side, because again, I work more on the B2B side. They see stuff on Dribble, Medium, it looks amazing. There's new UI trends, etc. I'm trying to ask to think where their product should be on the frontier. So again, if I use this notion again, I'm actually trying to ask them to map their products. So with the two examples I shared earlier, that's what would you get: the simple version for small and medium enterprises, and the more advanced version for experts. And in finance, there's actually a notion of suitability, which is you have to ensure that the financial product you give to people match their financial understanding of things. And I feel kind of the same here is we need to give the right level of complexity in the interface and match it to the right level of knowledge to our users. And we need to do it by understanding their needs and doing user research. Yeah, so in short, make sure we give the right amount of complexity to the right people. So depending on the audience, to wrap up on this section, I would say the designer's challenge is actually to find that sweet spot between the not too simple and the not too complicated. And we have to take this seriously. That brings me to this last section, which is surviving complexity. And let's say you now have to design, for example, for employees, B2B, wholesale, and you are in this domain of high business complexity and high interface expertise, but yourself is not the expert. So how do you do to survive? There's actually a lot to say here, but I try to narrow down three things that help me, the team, the people I mentor, and I think that should definitely set you towards the right direction, especially again if you work in this complex environment or has to design with lots of data. So the first one, I mean, that sounds like a no-brainer, but it's worth saying, don't panic. Especially because we as designers, we are often prone to the imposter syndrome. One of the most common questions I get asked in interviews is, do I need a financial background to design for financial people? And well, no, actually not at all. If you look on the side, I have actually put some of the backgrounds of my own team, and you can see that some people have studied complete different things like fine arts, some did study product design and some finance, but we also have people who study psychology and neuroscience, architecture, etc. And also another notion I'd like to point out is experts themselves, you will find out they don't know everything. They usually know a lot what they do, their niche, but they wouldn't know what other experts do. And I guess where I'm trying to get at now is, well, it's sometimes not comfortable to acknowledge that we don't know everything. It might be destabilizing, but knowing that this is fine, it's normal to feel this way at the beginning and you'll get through it eventually. I think that's one of the lessons people learn when they join actually my team, and they have to go through all this the first years they design with us. The second tip I would have is actually, if you design the complex space, is to start with non-design tools. And I've heard a quote I really like from Abby Covert, who wrote the book How to Make Sense of Any Mess. And basically, she said that there aren't many causes for confusing information. It's either too much of it, not enough of it, not the right one, and maybe a combination of all three. And again, here, there's what you need to understand to make sense of all those complex elements. And but there's the others. So this is why I will actually build on what she said and basically say there's you, the users, and your project members. And the way we found to deal with, again, managing all level of knowledge for as designers, the level of knowledge for the users, but also the level of knowledge for project members, because they're all different, is trying to align everyone's knowledge through a spreadsheet. Again, because very often you'll be dealing with data. For us, at least, is the best way we found to actually be able to list everything, clarify any jargon we don't understand, but maybe it's just the designer who don't understand. Sometimes it's the designer and the users, and only the project people will understand. Also align everyone on the same words, because sometimes they use different words for the same meanings. And also just act as an official record to say, hey, this is everything we need to design with for the interface. And actually, again, it's Excel, but I like to joke that we do a lot of design in Excel because this is really content design. And this can be user tested. Actually, sometimes we do just test spreadsheets just to make sure that clients have everything they need. Because it's be too late if you design the whole thing and suddenly you realize that you miss a huge section of information in your interface, and maybe you wouldn't design it the same way. Um, so the last tip I would have, and I think that's probably the most important according to me, especially with what I've said in the intro and what I've seen recently, is to be beware of rules, especially because, and probably that's because of social media, the Instagram, the Dribble, the TikTok, and everything. A lot of time, the content gets synthesized, and you obviously have to hook people. So the usual format is do this, don't do this, or you will not believe what I've learned, whatever. Here's all the tips you need to apply, etc. But again, here they will be missing their context. So for example, if you see this, and this is what people use in the trading floor to communicate with each other. That's what people or sales and traders speak in their native language, kind of. You would not understand. I mean, maybe someone here today will understand, but I would not understand this, and no one in my design team will understand this. But it doesn't mean that it's not a language that makes sense for them. And I think the best way I found to explain that is if you've been talking to your developers, or if you have learned code yourself, you know that, for example, if you haven't learned CSS, probably doesn't mean anything. But if you've learned, and actually I took a class in animation CSS, so now I kind of understand what that means. And I kind of agree that this is probably the most efficient way to set up an animation in CSS. And I've talked about developers, but if we think about designers, well, we are experts of our design tools too. Can you imagine if someone was redesigning Figma with all the rules that you see, such as, forms have to be in one column and you have to put the label and everything? Actually, I did this exercise just for fun. It would look like this. And I tried to be really clear about it. So that's why you end up with like a 5-step form with all the information that you have, whereas in Figma, it's just in one panel. So hopefully nobody would want to use such a design tool that I designed on the right side of the screen. So that wouldn't be a great tool to use as a professional, right? So don't do that to other experts. If you look at most of, I would say, the serious research on how to design for complex applications, you will see that most of the time they talk about guidelines. So it's not rules, not tips, no secrets. So this is I don't know if it's big enough on your screen, but this is an example from the Nielsen Norman Group. And again, it doesn't mean that everything you see online is bad, because the strength of our community is to be able to share this knowledge and grow together. But just to be mindful of what you see, especially when you don't have the context attached to it. So yeah, again, without talking about, we're not talking about definitive rules. It's more about guidelines, and you have to be mindful of context. My last advice is to buddy up. And I think this one is probably one I've learned over the years, and something that is always a bit uncomfortable as a designer, because sometimes it's really easy to feel different from the other peers. And even sometimes I've heard, oh, they just don't get design, they don't want to let me do my work, etc. But when you design with a lot of complexity, you will not be successful alone. You have to move from the us versus them to let's do it together. Let's try to make it work. And changes this mindset can take time. And again, I know that we sometimes, and I get this kind of discussion a lot in the different podcasts that I go through, but when you reach a certain level of leadership, it's more about like trying to make it work with your peers. It's not so much about staying in design, but even at a design level, to be successful, it's better to work with your project people than against them. And again, it's not easy because we're dealing with humans here, but it's really worth going through this hassle, because ultimately these people will become your champions. And when there's trust, you can start sharing the challenges. To give you one example, something that we agreed to do is to open up our design process. And I'm sure when I say that, some people might think, oh, that means we let them edit stuff in Figma. No, we still don't let them edit the prototypes in Figma. But what we try to do with them is explain, before doing a prototype, we need to understand the user flow, the user path, and they can actually be trained. And sometimes they've been doing architect flows or any kind of flows. Well, like here, it's just like doing it with humans. And we will even give them this as homework, because it'll be probably more efficient for them to do that, because it's complex and they know all the steps and everything. And we review it together than me trying to really understand, for example, how you will finance a bridge or how you finance a ship. Again, it's just better to teach someone to do a flow and do it for me. Again, because they understand the complexity of our industry and systems. As a final wrap up, well, as said earlier, don't feed your pros and employees. Find the right balance with the UX efficient frontier. And when dealing with complexity, well, don't panic. Beware of the rules and buddy up. As I like to joke about, life is complex and our tools can be too. And again, there's so much to explore on the frontier. I've been doing this for more than 10 years, and it's been really interesting every year. And I would say even more, especially in this area, more than ever, we designers are needed to tame the complexity of life. So a little plug time here. If you want to hear more stories about complex design systems, you can have a look at our Medium blog. That's where the team shares the daily life projects, sad passions, and things they've learned. And as for me, you can find me, well, on most social medias, such as Twitter and LinkedIn and Medium. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Morgane. That was a brilliant presentation. Really enjoyed it. And actually, I've attended a lot of these presentations at this conference and other UX and user interface conferences. And it's the first time I've heard the issue of complex, the design of complex applications.
I don't understand why.
Yeah, and you've answered a lot of the questions that I would have had in my mind at the very start. Thank you very much. And I was really interested as well to hear you talk about using Excel as a kind of wireframing tool, because I was moderating a session on wireframing yesterday, and we mentioned PowerPoint then, but never Excel as a tool for kind of designing applications. That was great. We've had some, lots of applause coming in and lots of
Oh,
nice
thank you.
comments, and also some great questions. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at those, but there's one from Christine about onboarding for complex tools to help people do their jobs properly. Do you have any tips on helping users overcome the necessary complexity of these applications?
Ooh, yeah. I remember at the beginning, I was actually biased myself. I was like, yeah, a good tool should have no onboarding, otherwise that means the design is bad, because I was so also kind of biased, towards consumer apps. But I came to change my mind about it. I think having a bit of onboarding is good, but what we have to be mindful is it onboarding on the interface of the tool, or is it onboarding on the business itself? I would probably say business itself, we should probably not do that. That's not our role.
Sure.
Again, to use the example I used, because I know it's a super complex one. If you want to finance a bridge, a ship, a plane, anything, it's really complex. But I will not design something that will teach someone how to finance, because they can go to school and they have their own trainings, right? The financial training. But so that means in the interface, if there's any acronyms that is the common one in the industry, I wouldn't bother trying to simplify it or write it all down, because that's just how people use and how people talk. But then if I design something that is, for example, I need to teach them how to use a specific layout or area of the app, then a little bit of onboarding can be okay. The best way to think about it, and I remember like the day I did this oversimplified Figma, that's when my designer got it, because for many, many years I was trying to tell them, don't oversimplify, don't treat your users as babies, but that's against what they've learned at school. And I'm like, yeah, what if I simplified Figma for you? And I'm sure people who use Figma can be super powerful, but you will accept having to learn how to use auto layout, how to use component, how to use basically all the features of Figma. And Figma is great, actually. You can see the onboarding that they make is tutorials. They have videos, they have webinars. Not saying obviously that that's what you need to do, because everything is in the context of your company. But I think that's for a good way I've seen of how they actually manage to onboard people on complex features that they build, so that they learn how to use those to be more efficient as designers.
Perhaps there's even a role for user assistance or online help, which is the world I come from. Actually, that's what I do most of the time. The problem is always getting people to read that kind of information and making it very easily accessible from the interface, because often people just want to, the last thing they want to do is click on a question mark button, which will take them into some other realm where they've got to find the answers they need.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I mean, this is where, just to finish on this is where I find what Figma is doing very interesting, because, I mean, being a customer myself, I was very surprised at the beginning that they wouldn't send us someone to train the team. In the past, I mean, usually with other tools, you buy the tool, and then someone trains you. That's what usually we would do. Obviously, if you're just like one user and you're using on your personal account, they wouldn't do that. But as a company, if you buy a tool, you kind of expect some kind of trainings. And they were like, no, that's the link, look for yourself. And I was very, I was like, what? But I have to admit, they're right. I mean, it's like everyone has different level of knowledge of Figma, and you can watch every video. It's probably better for them to make one good video of a feature than sending 100 people train 100 companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
Sandra's picked up on the word friction, that you mentioned friction as an intentional component to balance out in the UX. How do you pitch that to stakeholders when their notion is that UXers help remove friction and the pain? Aren't we always striving to remove friction? How do we? Yeah. What about that? How do we pitch that as our plan?
So I don't think we should always remove friction.
Okay.
And maybe there's two cases. There's a case where your business stakeholders, project people understand that. Again, give you a real example. In finance, we have something called the fat finger. The fat finger is when someone make a mistake, or they misclick, or they, like they clicked on a number, and I'm sure maybe you've heard about some stories in the press where like someone want to trade, I don't know, 1 million and they ended up trading 10 billion. That has huge consequences.
Right.
And in terms of UX, we actually work on some services to put those checks to make sure, is that what you're trying to do? And like if you've been using any, and I think Figma does that, I can't remember, but like in GitHub, definitely, if you try to delete something, a repo where like a lot of other repo are connected to, they will ask you, can you write the name of the repo to make sure that's the action you want to do? So those frictions are super beneficial for the user because we want to catch any errors they may make.
Right.
And usually that's a problem that the business has too, because if, let's say, someone trades 10 billion instead of 1 million, that's going to create a lot of issues in the system. And same for GitHub, if someone deletes by accident their repo, they have to go to their support and everything.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that's the case where people are aware and they want a line. Another line, that's a tough one because, how do you do that? It's kind of like if people ask you to use dark pattern or deceptive patterns, like the free trial, but you have to pay or put your card details and we'll charge you anyway. And it's like if you try to cancel it, it's kind of hidden in like 1,000
Mhm.
sub navigation
Mhm.
links. That's more difficult because obviously people want you as a designer to implement that. But I would say probably it's a bit like if when they ask you to do something and you don't have enough user research to do it, your job is part of your job. I mean, nobody can go against you for trying to do your job, is to make them aware that, hold on, are we really going to design this because I don't have enough information to do my work. And it's kind of your job also to let them know that you don't have enough input or enough knowledge about it. Here, I would say it's kind of our job to make them aware that what they're asking is considered as a deceptive pattern that is starting to be more and more scrutinized and regulated. Therefore, that is actually turning into a huge risk for them to implement this. But again, if they want to hardcore sign it with the blood that they're going to do that, let me just record it, put in the system that you are the one who wanted to do that.
Yes.
Let's go with it.
Yeah.
Can tell you, nobody will. I mean, when I tried, at least, it wasn't for that. Usually it's like when people don't want to do user research, I'll just like, you sure you want to do user research? I would advise you to do that. But if you don't want to do it, I'll just record it that it's you who said you didn't want to do it. So if there's any problem later on, that'd be your fault. I mean, I don't say it like that. But then people try to kind of think twice before asking those kind of things.
Sure. Yeah. Kimberly's asked about breaking the idea of mobile first development. I guess mobile first is often a driver to make interfaces more and more simple. Do you have any thoughts on how we sort of break this idea? I guess mobile is not often going to be the device that people are using when they're working with very complex applications. So it's maybe perhaps something you need to explicitly rule out.
I wonder who designs on Figma on their phone. I'm not talking about tablets. I wonder just Figma on their phone. So first, you can't. I mean, they released some features recently, but I really wonder if you would do that. And also, that's something I changed my mind about because, I also was educated with mobile first. That's the best. Everything should be thought first. But then I was like, none of our users are going to use this on mobile. It's like less than 1%. And sometimes they're not even allowed to do that on their phone.
Yeah.
So probably getting data is the best way to kind of see, okay, who are we going to design for? And actually, this is funny because, as I said earlier, I am a mentor for a bootcamp, and most of the time, what people do, because it's the easiest, I guess, is mobile first design, and also because that's the standard. And I always recommend them to at least have one desktop project to show people that they are able to do a layout, a composition on desktop. And when they do it, they realize it's so much different. It's kind of designing the same thing again, because you wouldn't lay out the thing the same way. And when you look at most tools, they don't actually have the same layout on mobile and desktop. It's not just pushing some stuff around, which is what we've been led to think all so many years. But
Yeah, good point. Josh has got a great question. I love this. Sometimes there's a hard line between power users and casual users, but other times there's a continuum. How do you approach making the right amount of complexity available to different users in the same system? And I was kind of thinking maybe you're a frequent business traveler who travels Eurostar a lot and you're constantly booking and you actually want a more compact booking system, a bit more like the travel agent. So how do you handle that sort of
I have a
continuum?
great story about this
All right.
because I can't remember. I mean, that was before the pandemic because obviously everyone stopped traveling. But at my company, they changed the travel system and they've done something that I would use as a personal traveler. And all the assistants were furious. They were telling me, and I remember because, I think I'm biased professionally. When someone complains, even if it's not something I work on, I'm like, oh, tell me more. But like they were saying how before they had everything on one screen because like for an assistant can do up to 80 bookings a day. Can you imagine?
Wow.
So before one booking, one screen, and now they have to go through 5 steps to do this booking. And so I think in terms of time, instead of making it more efficient for them, they were spending more time clicking all over the place. And instead of actually reviewing the information, they were just clicking, and they were end up making more mistakes.
Right.
So yeah, that's not an easy one. Something I did not mention in the different graphs that I shared is it is true, the line is continuous. So it's not just dots, right? Otherwise, I would just put the quadrants.
Yeah.
And in a more advanced tool, we actually have several level of expertise. You have our regular expert user, and we have our ultra advanced expert users. And they're the ones who would actually really understand how to make curves in the market and everything. And so we have also people who can trade simple financial products and those who can trade the more complex one, but the ones who are the most dangerous if you don't understand what they do. And the way we deal with that is with user preference and settings. But I will have to give a pot of caution here because we all know that people never change the users. I mean, not a lot of people, except for more like advanced tool, I guess. So that's something we try to prompt them, or sometimes our salespeople we preset the tool for clients. So they will do like a meeting, try to understand what kind of needs they need, and depending on their needs they will decide which tool to give, and if it's the advanced one, because they can give the simple one, the advanced one, and even the advanced one they can preset for the client. So that's how we do.
Okay, interesting. I've got one more question for you, which is that you said that complex applications don't necessarily look beautiful, but they might look pretty ugly to a sort of at a glance. So are there any tips you can give for spotting what is a badly designed complex interface?
Well, I think that's the problem, right? Because first, when we say ugly, from whose point of view?
Right.
I can tell you, I've heard some users say, wow, this is so sexy for a screen, which is like very disturbing. I was like, it's just numbers and boxes and buttons. But for them, because they're seeing it in the context of their job, they will find it not ugly, but like really nice.
Sure.
So I think ugly, again, and it's especially hard when you use those type of aesthetic words, is which gaze for whom, from whose point of view. And I think here we probably should more follow what user thinks than on things, what we've been educated with. But
I guess you can't necessarily judge from the appearance is what you're saying. You've got to.
That's such a nice
you've got to get people to try it out and see if it works or not.
Philosophical, but what I want to address next is how do you detect a bad design complex tool? That's the problem because you're not the users. I mean, if I was to rate a fitness app as me, I'm the user, I'm a customer, it's going to be easy. It'll be according to my criteria. But if I'm rating something, I don't even know how to use it and what it's for. Like if I was asking anyone here to rate what we design to finance bridges, ships, and aircraft stuff, you probably wouldn't know, except that, okay, there's a lot of data, looks great, there's a table here, but there's some status there and there's some colors there. But you wouldn't have enough like background to understand and to give an opinion, an informed opinion. I guess that's the most important. And I think that's another danger. I mean, we haven't talked about it, but like, for example, in my company, and I'll just finish on this because I know we're on time, we're right on time, because we have built a design system. So everything we design, now we do it with a design system that kind of evolves with everything we build. That means you can use the design system without UX. You can use a design system to make something that doesn't make sense, completely unusable, but you don't see it because it looks neat, it looks polished, because it looks exactly the same thing that would be designed by a designer.
Right.
And in the past, it used to be easier because most of the time, if it was the design system, that means behind there's a designer, and that means there's a good UX. And if it looks, let's say, ugly, not, like you have different buttons at every page, everything is misaligned, that there's no designer that worked on that thing, and probably the UX is bad.
Yeah.
But now with the design system, you can build very nice looking screen, and you don't know if the UX is good or not.
Sure.
And that's the problem when people ask me, can you review the UX? And I was like, oh no, I need to do a whole study. Sure. But in a sense, that kind of helps people understand more the difference between UI and UX.
Yeah. That's a great way to end. Thank you, Morgane. I feel like I could carry on chatting with you for hours. I'd love to hear more, but maybe if people have questions for you after the conference, they can contact you on that.
Absolutely.
On your socials there. Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day and your long weekend, Morgane.
Yes, I will. Enjoy one. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.